Beautiful. Shem Hashem Naaseh v'Natzliach. B'ezrat Hashem, tonight we're going to continue our study of Melachot Shabbat. We are in the Melacha of Bishul presently, which is the Melacha that has to do with cooking on Shabbat. And we already discussed a bunch of times different subjects in this Melacha. I think this might be our fifth shiur on Bishul. Is this the fifth? Yeah? Fourth? Fifth? I don't know exactly.
How many classes were there?
What?
How many classes were there?
I can't tell you already. We're already a long time doing it, Baruch Hashem. So Baruch Hashem, we have a long way to go still with Bishul. Plenty of more things to talk about. So let us begin. Okay, so tonight, what I want to talk about is actually a rabbinic decree that the rabbis came up with in order to safeguard a person from doing a melacha that he might have not been aware or might forget that he's doing. There are two gezerot of the Chachamim that we're going to talk about. First of all, before we start, I want to mention we're learning the Refuah Shlema of Mordechai Merda ben Evelyn, of Rabbi Baruch ben Zivra, Yaakov Yisrael ben Chanes Helen, Shmuel Moshe Shnina, and
It's Yisrael Rachamim Mordechai.
Yisrael Rachel Mordechai ben Evelyn. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other names? Yechiel Michal ben Shlomit. May they all have a refuah shlema b'toch shar chulei Yisrael. Okay. So now, the rabbis made a rule. There's a fear. There's a fear that the rabbis had in the times of Chazal. And it's important to be aware that when the rabbis come up with a rule, we treat it very, very severely. We don't cut corners. We don't say, oh, that's only the rabbis made it up. Because as you are all aware, we all make a blessing on Hanukkah candles, and we all make a blessing on reading the Megillah on Purim, and we say, Hashem, you commanded us to do this. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah, you commanded us to read the Megillah. But in reality, there's never a place in the Torah where it says that you have to read the Megillah, because the Megillah story happened after the Torah was given. So how could we say Hashem commanded us to read the Megillah or to light Hanukkah candles when they happened after the Torah was given? The answer the Gemara gives is because the rabbis told us to do so, and when the rabbis tell us to do that, then we treat it as if Hashem told us to do that, because Hashem in the Torah says, "Lo tasur min hadavar asher yigidu lecha yavilu smol." You shall not veer off the path the rabbis give you left and right. So you can't deviate. You have to do exactly what they say. So if the rabbis made this rule that I'm about to explain now, we have to make sure that we abide by it as well. The rabbis were very concerned that a person may come to his Friday night meal, and it's possible that his pot of maybe soup or a stew that he has up on the fire is just not cooked enough. And naturally, you want to eat a nice meal. So what you do, in order to get it to be more cooked, without thinking, not that you intend anything wrong, you're a wonderful, observant Jewish person. But without thinking, you forget yourself, you take a stick and you poke the coals underneath your stew. You shift the coals around in order to get it to be more flames. And that's how you're going to have more heat. And that's how your pot of soup is going to finish cooking. That's the fear that the rabbis had. Okay? That's called Shema Yachte Bagechalim. Maybe, or in case he might stir around the coals underneath the pot. Clear? No?
Can you say that term again?
Shema, Shin Mem Aleph, or Shema. Shema means in case, maybe. Shema Yachte, which means he'll stir up Bagechalim, the coals.
The gachalim.
Ba gechalim. He will stir up the gechalim. Gechalim are coals. Okay? Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what on earth does this have to do with us? We don't have coals. We're not doing barbecues. What does this mean for us, right? So first, let's get things clear. Let's understand what exactly are we saying, and then we'll apply it to our lives today.
So the
rabbis made a rule for that reason, because of this fear, that if you want to place food on an open fire, that means that there are coals and there's a flame underneath your pot. If you want to do that, according to the opinion of the rabbis of the Mishnah, then your food, now before I say what I'm about to say, I would like to explain that there are two opinions here in this halakha. And we are going to come out saying that ideally you should follow the more strict opinion, but if you can't and you need to follow the more lenient one, you can rely on the leniency, but ideally go with the more strict one. Okay, that's what's going to be the bottom line, but I need you to understand both opinions first. The first opinion is, and this is what Maran Shulchan Aruch says, which is why we ideally should follow this. We follow always Maran Shulchan Aruch. So what he says is that you're not allowed to leave any food on an open fire unless the food is so cooked that the continuous cooking is actually detrimental to the food. That means that it's going to make it more dry, and you don't want that. So the only permission that we have, the only heter that we have to leave food on an open fire, that means coals underneath, and there's a flame, right? That's what the Mishnah is talking about. The only time we're allowed to do that is if what you're cooking has already reached the point that it's so cooked that if you leave it on, it's actually getting worse. And therefore, there's no concern that you're going to stir up the coals underneath, because why would you do that? It's making your food, drier. So it's actually harming your food. That's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, which is what we should technically be following. Clear? Okay.
Why would we do that anyway?
Wait a second. So that's step one. Again, now what am I talking about? I'm talking about leaving it on an open fire. For us, that means you have a stovetop, whatever it is, with an actual flame, or if it's electric, doesn't make a difference. And you're leaving it directly on the stovetop. You want to leave something directly on the stovetop, according to the first opinion, no problem. It has to be totally cooked to the point that the continuous cooking is harmful to it.
What about hot water?
It has to be hot, very hot.
So you could leave it?
Okay, if it's very hot to the point that it's already
Boiling?
boiling, so then you would be allowed to leave it there.
You could leave it, you could take
on
it.
an open fire. On an open fire. Wait a second. I didn't say anything about putting it back. I just said leaving it there. Okay. So now we're learning about something called Shehiya. Shin, hey, yud, hey. It's called Shehiya. Shehiya means leaving something on an open fire. Okay, that's the subject that we're discussing right now. And the rabbis limited what we are allowed to do, what we are allowed to leave on an open fire. So according to the first opinion, what we are allowed to leave on an open fire is not much, just something that is so cooked that the continuous cooking is actually harmful to it. Okay, if let's say it's only, let's say that it's only a half cooked. According to this opinion, can you leave it on an open fire? No. If it's 3/4 cooked, can you leave it on an open fire? No. If it's totally cooked, but the continuous cooking is actually making it better because it's really, really liquidy and you want it to be a little bit more dry, can you leave it on the open fire? No. Okay? That's the first opinion of Shehiya. That's the opinion of Maran, the Shulchan Aruch, which we all should be following, ideally speaking. Okay? Clear? Is it clear? 100%? Okay, good. Now, next. The next opinion is the opinion of the Ramah, quoting the other opinion in the Gemara. And the Rama says the following. The Rama holds that that's not true. The Rama explains that you are allowed to leave on an open fire something so long as it's edible, even if it's not fully cooked. For example, there's a concept in all throughout Shas called Ma'achal ben Derusai. There was a guy, he was a bandit, he was a thief. His name was Ben Derusai. This man ran from place to place. He would steal things and he was always on the run. And since he was always on the run, he was never able to cook his food completely. Very miserable way to live. But that's what he was doing. He would steal things and he would run. He would have some food, but he would never cook it fully because he didn't have time. He had to cook it just till it was edible, eat, and then move. That was the fellow by the name of Ben Derusai, son of Derusai. Ma'achal ben Derusai, there's an opinion that it's a third cooked, and there's an opinion that it's a half cooked. We hold that it's a half. So he would cook his food till it's a half cooked. So according to the Rama, as long as your food is halfway cooked, you can leave it on an open fire. Okay, that's opinion number 2. As long as the food was halfway cooked, you are allowed to leave it on an open fire before Shabbat, and there is no more concern that you may come to adjust the fire on Shabbat or add fuel to the fire, or which there never really was a concern like that, but maybe stir up the coals and therefore increase the flames. There's no more concern like that once the food has reached the point of being edible. Once it's called Ma'achal ben Derusai, then it is something which you are allowed to go ahead and leave on an open fire. Is it clear? Yes? Okay. So even according to that opinion, which is the more lenient opinion, if you have a food that's less than half cooked for Shabbat, then let's say it's, I don't know, a quarter cooked. It's a third cooked, right? It's not a half cooked. So then you cannot leave it on an open fire before Shabbat. Why? Because the rabbis were concerned that you may come to adjust the flame and increase the flame or stir up the coals underneath it, if there are coals, etc. Is it clear? You have a question? Yeah. Okay.
Someone told me if you turn it on, like the right push back, it's literally completely off.
Yeah, good. That's I'm getting there right now. Kol hakavod. Very good. Okay, excellent. Okay, now the idea is like this. Whoever told your husband that is 100% right. The Gemara adds one more idea, and that idea is that it's called kedera chayata, which means a pot of raw food. Okay, if let's say, as a matter of fact, let's make it even more significant. Let's say you have a chalent that's been cooking for a whole day. Okay, the food is already really cooked, right? Or you know what? Let's make it worse. Sorry. Let's say that you have chalent that's in this gray area. It's a quarter cooked. Okay, and now all opinions tell you that you may not leave this chalent on an open fire. Like we said, the first opinion definitely says you can't. Why? Because it has to be, according to the first opinion, it has to be totally cooked, so much so that the continuous cooking is bad for it. So therefore, any less than that is forbidden to leave on an open fire. The second opinion is saying that no, even if it's not totally cooked, as long as it's halfway cooked, it's edible, so then that's okay. But it has to at least be halfway cooked to leave it on an open fire. If it's a quarter cooked, even the second opinion says you can't do it. Okay, fine. So it's a quarter cooked. It's bad according to everybody. There isn't a soul who says you could leave this on an open fire. Okay. We have a solution. If you take a piece of meat, a raw piece of meat, and you now put it in your chalent, you save the day. it could be left on an open fire. Why? The answer is because since this raw piece of meat, will not be cooked at all by the time you get home from shul Friday night. I mean, you just put it in before Shabbat, and it's a slow cooker. It's something that takes a long time. It's only going to be cooked by the morning. So therefore, what you have shown is that you have removed yourself from thinking about this pot of food. You have separated yourself from thinking about this pot of food. And therefore, you have no intention to return to it and look at it and try and see if it's good and maybe stir up the coals. You're out. It's done. It's finished. I put a raw piece of meat there a minute before Shabbat. It's over. I'm not looking at this thing till the morning. So therefore, that kind of thing could be left on an open fire. Okay? Clear?
But a slow cooker is not considered an open fire.
Most certainly is.
Oh, it is?
Of course it is. Sure. It's a heating element that is the same thing as cooking. It's a fire. Right? It's an open heating element, sure. Is it clear? So far, so good? We're good? You have a question? Yeah.
What about the status of that?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's heat coming out of the element, correct?
So it would have to either be completely raw or completely cooked to keep it on warm.
It would have to be either completely cooked to the point that the continuous cooking is detrimental, or in the second opinion, halfway cooked, or totally raw. Right. Okay. Yes.
What if there's no meat in the chore? Is there
The point is raw. The point is if it's totally raw, like she said, raw beans.
Like raw barley. Like
Right. It's not going to be cooked anytime soon.
Okay.
Right? Slow. It goes very slow.
And is there one?
When on Shabbat? No. No, because if it's not cooked and you stir it, so it's considered to be like cooking. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvaro.
Men. Can you?
Okay, yes.
Let's say Shabbat morning, children and morning. Can you could like stir it in pot? Let's say there's like meat on the water.
Okay, so we said that if you want to stir it, you have to remove it from the heating element. If you want to just take from the top, you could take from the top.
But I can't.
But while it's on the heating element, you can't stir it up.
I take it off.
And tonight, B'ezras Hashem, we're going to talk about how to take it off. Yes, we're going to get there. We're going to get there, yes.
I might have missed this, though. Can you put something wrong before Shabbat?
That's what we're saying. Yeah.
Totally right. No, it's not.
Totally raw. That's the point. That when it's totally raw, you can now leave it on an open fire because you're showing that you are removed from this item. You're not expecting it to be cooked for a long time.
Even if it's something like half an hour, let's say it's not the product, it can be something raw.
Oh, you're saying, okay, nice question. So you're saying, what if it's something that could be cooked in half an hour?
For an hour or by some.
That's a nice question. That's a nice question. So the pashtut is that probably it's still okay, but I could hear somebody who would argue. Because at this point you're saying, well, it's going to be cooked in half an hour. It's not like, but a raw piece of meat usually on a low flame is not usually going to happen. Takes time. What?
If it's raw right before Shabbat, what will be the issue?
The issue is that what she's saying is very, very nice. She's saying the whole idea of raw, why is it such a good thing, is because you're saying that, oh, it's raw, I'm not going to do anything because it takes a long time for this thing to cook. So I know it's not going to be ready for tonight. I know it's not going to be ready till the morning. So what's the concern? He might come to stir the coals. He's not going to stir up the coals. He knows that nothing is going to help it, sir. It's totally raw. Takes a long time. So she's saying, well, what if this thing's going to be done by the time you're finished cooking? By the time you're done with shul? What?
It's done when it's done, you know?
What do you mean?
Meaning like, if it's done when that's it, then you can eat it.
Yes, but she's saying the concern of the rabbis that I might come to stir up the coal is more relevant now because it's able to be cooked relatively quickly. So yeah, so that's why there's more of a concern. I believe that there's still
Is the slow cooker a lenient opinion, or everybody says this is fine?
about what part of the slope? What are you referring to?
Like is this like a lenient thing? Like if you want to use a slow cooker, does everybody say you could use a slow cooker?
Yes.
Fine, it's
Yes,
not
but
a
we're going to
lenient-
learn, we're going to talk about under what, we are talking about under what circumstances. Like, that's the
And it's
question.
raw.
So if it's raw, then everyone's going to tell you it's okay. What if it's a quarter cooked and everyone says it's a problem, right? So you have, what we're going to learn now is one thing we already learned, which is that you could put something raw in it, which is going to take a long time to cook. And then, Hashem, we're going to talk about a different solution shortly, okay? But everything is clear so far, so good? 100%? Yes.
If the soup is at a point where if it were to cook more, it would burn,
Mhm.
You still can't stir it, right? Because you're still helping it.
Right. While it's on the heating element, or on the pot, on the hot plate, don't do it. Don't stir.
Still move.
Remove it. Yeah. We're going to talk about how you can put it back on too. Okay. Good. So we have our two opinions clear. The halacha is we follow the first opinion because that's Shulchan Aruch. However, the poskim do say, which is a really interesting historical fact, that historically the halacha, the people practiced the more lenient opinion. Apparently, it used to be practiced more out of a love for the honor of Shabbat, that there should be hot food, and if this was limiting them from being able to put it up before Shabbat, so then it's a problem. You're not going to be able to enjoy Shabbat so much. So historically speaking, people always relied on the lenient opinion, and they allowed themselves to put up food even if it was only half cooked. And then came along the Shulchan Aruch, and he decided that really we should be doing it like the first opinion. So that's why we follow the first opinion. But if there's ever a need, you could rely on the other opinion. I'll tell you a case where this came up just recently for me. This was in Shul over here with Simchat Torah, and the people, with Simchat Torah, we had a lot of food here, and the caterer wanted to put up sternos. You know what sternos are? These little containers that you put underneath the tin foil trays, right? They open it up and they make a fire underneath it. So that's an open fire.
But on
That's an open
Simchat
fire.
Torah, shouldn't be a problem unless it's on Shabbat.
So in second, so it was a Simchat Torah. Yeah, I think it was on Shabbat. I think, was it Shabbat this year? I don't know. No, I can't remember exactly when it was. It was some event that maybe it was just a Shabbaton that I think it was, sorry, not Simchat Torah, it was a Shabbaton that we had. That makes more sense, right? We had a Shabbaton over here, and the caterer wanted to put sternos here and have the food on the sternos before Shabbat, and it's an open fire. There you go, right? So here you have this question. So the question is, can you have food that the continuous cooking is still good for it on the sterno from before Shabbat? So the answer is that according to the first opinion, no. But according to the second opinion, which apparently historically was the prevalent opinion, it was allowed. So therefore, there's what to rely on if you ever need to rely on it. So it was on an open fire, but being that all the food was completely cooked, we had the lenient opinion to rely on. Clear?
If a non-Jew does it for you, does it make a difference?
This has nothing to do with a non-Jew. This is a question of what are you allowed to leave on an open fire before Shabbat. There's no question of melacha. I'm not doing any melacha on Shabbat. I'm taking care of it before Shabbat, right? The question is, can I leave it there, or do the rabbis tell me it's forbidden? Yes.
You're saying that the caterer was going to turn on the sterno
Before Shabbat,
before Shabbat,
right?
and then
Put the food on it before Shabbat. And the question is, can I leave it there if some of these things, let's say, are very soupy, very watery, and the continued cooking is actually going to be good for it to dry up a little bit? Okay, so can you? So again, that's the difference between the first opinion and the second opinion. The first opinion says if the continued cooking is good, so you can't leave it on an open fire, right? Cannot do that. Second opinion says, no, as long as it's edible, it's halfway cooked, you could leave it on an open fire. What do we follow? We follow the first opinion. But what I'm explaining now is that the later rabbis explain that why do we follow the first opinion? Because the Shulchan Aruch, which is generally our Sephardic tradition, follows Shulchan Aruch. He says that, but the truth of the matter is that historically speaking, before Shulchan Aruch, everybody followed second opinion. So therefore, of Yitzchak Yosef, the chief rabbi, he writes that if somebody wants to be lenient, like the second opinion, he has what to rely on. So usually we would say, no, we don't do it. But if there's a need for it, we would allow it. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just take out.
Right.
Out.
So right, so that's a good point, actually, very good point. So we said you could take from the top. Right, that's a good point. Yeah, excellent. Yes.
Is there a difference on top of this channel before or once Shabbat are started?
Okay, so we're going to learn now, Bli Neder, that that's something which you would not be allowed to do. Right? That's forbidden. Even if it was hot, you can't do that. We're going to talk about that shortly. Yes.
Would the third opinion also be considered lenient?
Which third opinion?
Or that it's completely wrong?
No, that everybody agrees to.
Oh.
Yeah, everyone agrees to that. First opinion, second opinion, everyone agrees. If it's totally raw, there's no question, it's fine. Clear? Okay, beautiful. So this is the question of Shehiya. Okay, now the whole discussion over here is because of one issue and one issue only. That is because of the fact that it's an open fire. But the very Mishnah that we just spoke about explains that you could do something to a fire that will make it allowed to leave even something that is not totally cooked, according to the first opinion, or even if it's not even halfway cooked, according to the second opinion, you're allowed to leave it on this. And that is called two words. You have to know these two words, garuf vekatum. Let's write that down. Garuf, gimel reish vav pei, garuf pei sofit vekatum. Garuf vekatum means either one of two things. Either the person removed the source of heat completely, which is not really what we do so much. What they would do is they would either just take out the coals from the thing completely, and you're just using the leftover heat. Obviously, there's nothing to stir anymore, so there's no concern anymore. Or katum, and this is what we do usually. Katum means that the fellow would take ashes, and he would put the ashes on top of the coals, and the fire would still be there, but he put some ashes over them. And by doing that, he shows two things. Number one, he's showing that he is removing his mind from this issue over here called my pot of stew, which is cooking. I put ashes on the coals. I'm not involved anymore with this thing. I'm good. If you did that, then the halacha says we don't care anymore how cooked it is. Totally cooked, the continued cooking is good for it, it's bad for it, it's halfway, it's a quarter, it's this, it's that. Once you put ashes on the coals, you saved yourself. For the first reason, like we said, it shows that you're removing yourself. You're called mesiach dat. You're removing yourself from this issue here. And number two, very importantly, you are making a reminder for yourself not to stir the coals. When you would go and say, oh, this is not hot yet, and you would take the stick and you start to stir, you'd say, I can't stir. There are ashes here. There's a reason for that. Oh, it's because I put them there, so I shouldn't stir the coals. It's a reminder for you. How do we do that nowadays? What reminder do we have for ourselves not to touch the fire? Very good. We have two things. We have a blech, which is a sheet of metal that we use to cover the fire. And we also have a hot plate, which is a plate of metal, plugs into the wall, and gives you heat. The reason that these are so significant is because the reason that you are using them is A, to cover the fire, so that you're showing that you are mesiach dat from this, which means that you are leaving, you're separating yourself from this cooking over here right now. And B, it's a reminder for you not to touch the knobs and to increase the flame. That's the purpose of the sheet of metal that you put on top of the fire. And once you have that sheet of metal on top of the fire, or if you want to use a hot plate, the hot plate is also very good because of the fact that people don't cook things on hot plates. This is key to understanding why a hot plate is good. People never cook things on a hot plate. You'll never cook a soup on a hot plate. You cook a soup on the fire. You never cook chicken on a hot plate. You cook it on a fire, right? You keep things hot on a hot plate, but you heat things up on a hot plate, but you don't actually do cooking. People usually don't do cooking on a hot plate. And for that reason, when you put it there, it's a sign that you are not cooking anymore, right? And therefore, it is permissible to leave it there, and we consider it to be katum. It's the equivalent of covering the fire with ashes. So that's the reason why at this point, regardless of whether it's a fourth cooked, a third cooked, half cooked, fully cooked, which the cooking is still good for it, or fully cooked where it's bad for it, doesn't make a difference. It's on a blech, which is the sheet of metal that covers the fire, or it's on a hot plate, you're good. Doesn't matter. Is it clear? Yes.
So two things. One thing is I have an oven that has like a griddle on top of it in the middle, and it's like a sheet of like it's a griddle. So it's like a flat metal,
Okay.
and then there's a flame underneath. So could that be a blech?
Okay, so we'll talk about ovens in a minute, okay?
And
We'll talk about ovens shortly.
what about like the Shabbat mode? Is that
We'll get there shortly. Good questions. Good questions. Yes.
2 questions. So then is the clean status of cooked food or non-cooked food on the Shabbat?
Correct.
And the second question is, let's say hot water, can you fill it up right before Shabbat? Or
Yes.
even though like that's the clean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's raw.
Right, okay,
Right.
I can double check, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great.
So where did that
but it's not going to take a long time to get hot.
Takes time. That's a good question. That's a good question. I will look that up shortly. That's a very good question. Doesn't the water get heated up quickly? Okay, let's get back to that. Let's write that down. What about water urns? I'll get back to you on that one. Good. Excellent. Okay. Now, so yes.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. So if we have food on a hot plate,
Mhm.
we can mix it still on the hot plate if it's cooked, because there's no cooking after cooking, right?
No, you shouldn't mix things on a hot plate.
Like if it's like rice and it's on the hot plate and like, the bottom gets
I
hot
know.
first. and then-
That solid is not, we're not talking about solid, we're talking about liquids.
Oh, it's only liquids, right?
Yeah, like to flip a chicken over or something that's already dry and cooked that you don't have a problem.
Okay, that's where I got
Yeah,
confused.
no, I'm
So we're
talking about
liquids.
solids. Yeah,
Okay.
correct. Talking about liquids, I meant to say, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Finish up.
Okay, wait a second. Okay, 1 second. So 1 second. Hold on. No. Okay. Okay, good. Let's continue. We have a lot to do. So I want it to be very clear. Garuf v'katum. You need to have these words very clear. Garuf v'katum means that the source of fire has been covered. For all intents and purposes, that's what it means. The source of fire has been covered, and therefore you have a reminder not to mess with the fire, and therefore it's okay to go ahead and to leave it on the fire regardless of how cooked it is. Okay, that's what a blech accomplishes, and a hot plate, according to at least Chacham Vadia, that does the same thing. Okay, Uvikatum means again that that the coals were shoveled out, or katum, which means that it's been covered, which is what we usually do. We cover the flame. Okay, very good. Now, before we move on, the question that many poskim ask is, can you go ahead and put a blech on the fire on Shabbat? Let's say you forgot. You forgot to put a blech there. You forgot to put the sheet of metal. The flames are up. you want to just put the sheet of metal there on Shabbat. So that is, again, an argument amongst the poskim. The Chazon Ish said that you should not do it because he held that since the flame is going to be heating up the metal on Shabbat, it's like cooking the metal on Shabbat, which we learned that even non-foods cooking is a problem. So he held that that would actually be considered cooking the metal, making it into a softer vessel, which is a problem. According to Moshe Feinstein, however, he said it's such a small flame, it doesn't have the power to do that. So therefore he held it's okay. So somebody wants to be lenient, let's say they're stuck and they can't heat anything up now because they don't have a cover to the flame. Rav Moshe held it's permissible. There's what to rely on, but ideally, of course, you want to make sure it's there before Shabbat. Okay, very good. Now, the idea that we're talking about also applies to ovens as well. Now, when it comes to an oven, there are a bunch of things that you have to be worried about. By an oven, you have to make sure, first of all, that you cover the source of the heat. Now, how are you going to do that by an oven? There isn't really a way to do that. So what they say to do is at least cover the knobs of the oven. If you cover the knobs of the oven, so then that could be like Shehiya. That could be like Garuf V'Katum. You cover the knobs so that you make sure, or remove the knobs. You make sure that that's a reminder for you not to mess with the fire on Shabbat. Now, there's a big problem over here. When it comes to ovens, the problem is that when the door of the oven opens up, a lot of times what happens is cold air goes in, and it actually, because the thermostat is telling it needs to be at a certain temperature, it actually increases the fire of the oven. So for that reason, which is a problem. To create more fire on Shabbat is an issue. So they came up with something called Shabbat mode. What Shabbat mode does is it keeps the fire steady, not increasing at all. It's the same fire, will not change. No more fuel will be added in. No increase will happen. It'll stay the same. And you can open up the door and don't have the worry of this fire increase on Shabbat. That's all Shabbat mode does for you. Okay? Very important. It does not mean by any means that you can put something in there and cook it on Shabbat. God forbid. All it means is that if you would like to remove food from the oven while the fire is still on, then you don't have to worry about the fire becoming bigger because of you opening the door. Okay? Is that clear? One second. Is that clear? Yes? Okay. Now, next point about ovens. Okay? The next point is that if you decide that you want to leave something in the oven, so again, it's the same rules as the stovetop. The poskim say that nowadays the oven has the same rules as the stovetop, and therefore you would need to, like we said, cover the knobs. If you want to leave something there, that would enable you to leave whatever level of cooked it is. If it's a fourth cooked, it's a third cooked, it's 3/4 cooked, it doesn't matter. You covered the knobs, you're good to go. Okay, you can leave it there, you're all good. Or remove the knobs. But like we said, you have to have Shabbat mode on the oven so that you can open it and the fire will not go off. Or some ovens have a light that indicate to you when the fire is on. And that can help you because by you knowing when it's on, you'll only open up the oven when the fire is on. That way you're not doing anything. You're not turning on the fire. It's already going. So that would also be helpful to you as well. Yes? It's a great question. It's a great question. The difference between the two is the reason that we're more lenient by a fridge is because by a fridge, the question seems to be only at worst, a rabbinic violation. By this, it's a question of starting a fire, that's a d'oraita. So therefore, we're more strict over here. Yeah, that's Chacham Ben Sion's take on it. Yeah.
What's the confusion with the fridge?
The reason, so some people want to say by refrigerator, the same rule applies, which means you have to walk over to the fridge. And some people till this day do this. You have to walk over to the refrigerator, listen to the fridge. If the fridge the motor is running, compressor is running, So then you can open up the fridge and take out whatever you want because it's already running. So you're not doing anything by opening up the fridge. Many times, however, the compressor is off. You're going to open up the door, and 2-3 seconds later, you'll hear, right? It starts going on. Why? Because the warm air rather entered, the thermostat got turned on, and boom, now the motor has to start to give you the cold air again. So some want to say that by refrigerator, also you have to listen carefully to the fridge and see if it's right, see if it's running or not.
Are there Shabbat
Okay,
refrigerators?
one second. So therefore, some people say that you need to do that, but we are lenient, and we say that no, since the whole thing is only a derabanan, even if you did turn it on intentionally, according to many, and you didn't do it directly, it was indirectly, it wasn't your intention either. So therefore, we're lenient. So she's asking, well, how come you can't do the same thing for the oven? So Chacham Ben Zion says the reason is because by the oven, there's a question of a deoraita, which is turning on a fire.
And if
Clear?
the fridge is on Shabbat mode, then that's not, the compressor isn't an issue?
Right, so that would take care of that as well. Right, exactly.
There is such a thing as a
Yes, there
refrigerator
is.
that's
Yes,
on Shabbat?
there are. Yes, there are.
Most of them have.
Yes. Okay, yes, question? So Moshe Feinstein asked the question, it's a very good question. How come the knobs being there is not considered the flame still being available? So he says there's a difference between the two. And he says that the rabbis were concerned you may take the existing coals, stir them up and get the fire to become bigger. They never were concerned you may add more coals. The knobs actually, when you increase them, you're not actually stirring the existing fire, you're increasing the fuel. It's like adding more coals. So in his opinion, you don't really need to remove the knobs because they never had a fear that you would add more fuel. That's what he says. Very interesting. Great question. Okay. Wow. Okay, so therefore, when it comes to leaving food in an oven on Shabbat, you would need to have the Shabbat mode to be able to take stuff out of the oven. Or the light that indicates that the fire is already on. Another condition, if you take food out of the oven on Shabbat and you want to leave some food in the oven, you have to know ahead of time that the food that is going to be in the oven and stay in the oven is already cooked. Because if you remember, we learned already in the past that when you have a pot of cholent, let's say, and the pot of cholent is not totally cooked, and Friday night you go to the pot of cholent and you want to take some, you eat a little bit, you say, oh no, this thing is not ready yet, right? So then what do you do naturally? You take the lid and you put it back onto the pot. Oh, wait a second. That's a problem. Why? Because to take the lid and put it back onto the pot is actually causing the food to continue to get cooked. Now it's helping the cooking process. Think about it. You know how hard it is for the pot of cholent to cook without the lid? It's going to take much longer. By you sealing in the heat, so now it's very good. It's much easier to cook it. So therefore, the halacha says you would not be allowed to put that pot, the lid back onto the pot. Same thing over here. The oven, if the oven door is open and this thing isn't cooked yet, it's not cooking. It's very hard for it to cook. What's going to help it cook? When you close that door. You understand? So if you're taking stuff out of the oven and leaving stuff in the oven, you can only leave it in there provided that it's already fully cooked. If it's not, then you closing the door on it would be cooking it on Shabbat. Clear? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah.
If I cook something and I put it in the oven and I turned it off right before Shabbat, so the oven's off and I keep the light on so it doesn't trigger, but I'm keeping it in there, just keep it warm. It's already cooked. There's no issue with like opening.
I'm sorry, what? One more time, please?
Like I cook something in the oven.
Yeah.
I turn the oven off right before Shabbat starts.
Yeah, okay.
Now like an hour into Shabbat, I want to bring it out. I left it in there to just keep it hot. I'm going to bring everything out.
Yeah.
There's no issue with that.
No. That's great. It's very good. Okay. Great. Excellent. Okay, so we spoke about ovens. Okay, very important. Okay. Second,
What about with griddle?
yeah, what's your question?
Like if you have like an oven that has the middle, it's like there's a griddle and it's like a sheet of metal
Okay,
that it's not a black sheet of metal, but it's like a metal and there's
it's
no
not considered, it's not, that's the normal status of the oven. So you would need to take off the knobs or cover them.
cover the knobs, but can you just put a pot on that?
No,
Really?
yeah. You need to do something more significant.
Because that's the way the oven is?
Yes.
Oh,
Alrighty, very good. Okay, so now, so these are things that we're talking about, whether you're allowed to leave the food on that, in that oven as is, right? So again, it's the same rules, by the way, like a stovetop. Stovetop, we said you want to leave it on an open fire, no problem. Just make sure it's fully cooked, and the continuous cooking is detrimental, right? You want to leave it on, or according to the other opinion, if it's half cooked, it's good, right? Very good. So the same rules apply to an oven as well. Clear? Very good? Excellent. Okay, good. Fine. So now, that's with respect to the oven. So this is the halacha of Shehiya. Now, I would like to explain to you why it's so important for us to be aware of garuf v'katum, of what is considered to be covering the heating elements. The reason is because if you want to put something back onto a fire on Shabbat, okay, so then the halacha says clearly, the only way that you could put something that was on a fire back, if you take it off and you want to put it back on, the first condition is it has to be garuf v'katum, okay? So that means the following. What I'm now going into is something called chazara. Chazara. Chet zayin reshe. Chazara means returning. Right. Yeah, usually it means reviewing, right? Over here it means returning a pot of hot food back to the flame. Let's say, for example, you have a soup on the fire and you desire to take the soup off the fire and put it back on so that you can have it on Shabbat afternoon. Right? Let's say sometimes people want soup Shabbat day.
of hot soup.
Hot soup, hot cholent. You want to take the cholent out of the heating element, put it back in. Right? So this is called chazara, chazarat tafshil, which means the return of the pot to the heat source. Is there a permissible way to do that or not? The answer is the Shulchan Aruch gives us 4 conditions for chazara. And he says the following. The first condition is that it must be totally hot. It still has to be yad soledet bo. Okay? Yad soledet bo means that it has to be totally hot. If it cooled off, like we learned in the past, you cannot reheat it anymore. So if, let's say, it became lukewarm, the soup became, a little bit cooler, can't put it back. It has to still be 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Number 2, like we said, the only time you'd be allowed to put it back is if it is garuf v'katum. What's garuf v'katum? It's covered. So for example, the cholent pot heating element, right? You would need to put some kind of a cover on it so it's not direct. For example, I take every week, well, not every week, I try to do it in a way that it stays so I don't have to do it every week. I take tin foil and I put it on the inside of the heating element so that the pot, the insert, doesn't actually touch the heating element. Clear?
Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. So
The
garuf v'katum on a heating element for a crock pot. I take the pot out. I line the pot with silver foil, tin foil, aluminum foil, so that when I insert the pot, the actual insert into the pot, it's not actually touching the walls of the heating element. Why is this so important? Because if, let's say, on Shabbat, I want to take the pot of cholent out serve it, and then I want to put it back in. Maybe they want it for Sudash Nishit. No problem. You could do that on one condition, on 4 conditions. One of them is that the element that you're using needs to be covered. Garuf the katum. Has to be katum, has to be covered up. Yeah.
For the first condition, the pot has to be totally hot, or the food inside?
The food inside has to still be yad soledetbo. Yes.
The
That's
heating
number one.
element has to be covered.
Number 2, the heating element has to be covered. Or your fire. Let's say it was a soup, and you want to serve that same soup the following day. So you can take if let's say that you went with the opinion that says that you're allowed to leave an leave a pot of soup on an open fire. Let's say it was fully cooked. So you're going with the more lenient opinion that, or maybe it was a half cooked, whatever. So now it's Friday night, the item is fully cooked already. You take it off the fire, but your flame is open. So even though the thing is still boiling hot, the rabbis made a rule: I'm not allowed to put this pot back on that open fire ever. It has to be covered. It has to be garuf v'katum, which means a covered flame, in order for me to put it back there. Clear? Okay, that's condition number 2. Condition number 3, like we said, I'm sure you're all very obviously aware, the item that we're talking about has to be fully cooked. How would I ever be allowed to put something back onto a heat source if it's not cooked? That would mean I'm cooking it now. So that's obviously a condition, right? It has to be totally cooked. It has to still be yad soledet bo, that if it's a liquid, then it cools down, then me heating it up is cooking it, so that's a problem as well. It has to be covered. And lastly, but not least, it has to be that you don't put it down on the floor. A lot of times what happens is you're dealing with a bunch of things there. There's a pot here, there's a pot there, trying to organize stuff. So then what you do is you take the pot that's heavy, because you want to move things around, and you take it and you put it on the floor. Maran Shulchan Aruch says, if you put it on the floor, you have disqualified it from being allowed to put it back.
Why?
The reason is because you were mesiach dat, which means you removed it from your mind. And at that point, we're concerned that it cooled off so much that if you put it back on, you're recooking it. Even though it's right now boiling hot, says Maran, the rabbis disqualified it. On the spot, if you put it down on the floor, you cannot put it back on.
Like 4-4, or like table is also.
Oh, good question. Does that apply to a table? Does that apply to a countertop? Does that apply to a chair? Excellent question. So the poskim say that anything which is comfortable, convenient, like for example, a countertop is the same thing as the floor.
Really?
Right. So if you put it on a kitchen countertop, so let's say I take the pot of soup off of the blech, boiling hot, fully cooked, right? I take it off the blech, I put it onto a countertop. The poskim say at that point you may no longer put it back onto the fire. However, one second. However, if you do the following, you can save yourself. Chacham Ben Zion writes this, other poskim write this. If you want to put it on the countertop, as long as you put something underneath it so it's a little bit less comfortable, less convenient, so that you're thinking about it because you have to put it back. For example, take a towel and put it on top of the towel. So now it's a little bit less, it's a little more shaky, right? Now it's not considered to be like the floor anymore, and you can put it back with the other 3 conditions. It's totally cooked, it's still very hot, and it's a covered fire.
But
1 second, clear? Yes? 100%? You have a question?
Don't people usually put like, I forgot what it's called, but under like hot pots and things like that?
Yeah.
Sure. So wouldn't that be like?
Would a trivet do the job? It's a good question. I think they're looking for something that's a little bit more shaky, a little bit less comfortable. The point is that your mind should be on it, that I can't leave it there. It's like imbalanced even, I gotta get it out of there. So therefore your thoughts are on it. Understand? I don't think so. That's why they say also a chair would be an okay thing. Because leave it on a chair, You're nervous. The chair is
My
not
chair.
exactly. You're not comfortable on the chair. You're saying, wait, the chair, leaving a pot of soup, hot pot of soup on the chair. That's terrible. Gotta get it out of there, right? So therefore, so something that's comfortable and comfy, that's no good. Yeah. Question.
So, what do you do when you're serving, like, is this also a part of that, like when you're serving him, put it on under a towel?
No. This is just a question of. Oh, you mean, and you want to put the
Is that after
soup
you serve food
back?
or back? Yeah.
So that's the point. You're serving,
On the Shabbat table.
meaning you want to bring the pot of soup to the Shabbat table.
It wouldn't stay
So-
on.
What? So if you want to do it like that, then yeah, it's the same rule.
I
Yeah.
always put it on my kitchen
I
counter.
I do the same thing. I take the challah pot, let's say out, I put the towel underneath, right? I kind of fold it so it's a little bit wobbly, so it's not comfortable. And then I serve it from the countertop into the big serving bowl, and I bring the serving bowl to the table. That's how I do it personally.
I put all
Yeah.
my food on my kitchen countertop when I serve.
You leave your food on the kitchen counter.
Yeah, because it's like a buffet,
That's nice.
because it's an open kitchen,
Beautiful.
so.
Okay, so the question is if you want to put it back on the.
No, but I mean, anyway, before Shabbat starts, everything is always on the black.
Great. The question is, we're talking about now that you served it, you want to put it back on the blend.
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about now. yeah.
And then I have it not, but then the next day I take everything out to be heated. I put it on my kitchen counter because it's very heavy.
Okay, so again, remember, it depends on what you want to reheat, right? We learned about
But I have a non-Jew, put everything.
that.
that's to be
Okay, we
done.
learned about that too. Good.
So
very
that's
good.
fine, right?
Yes, yes. No. She said she has a goy do that.
A non-Jew.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, that's what she said. Yes.
The towel have to be folded, so it's wobbly or it can be straight.
I didn't see them say that it needs to be folded. That's just what I do. Yeah. Okay, very good. We have a lot more to discuss over here, but it seems that we're out of time, so we're gonna stop over here. All right. Thank you very much, guys. So next week, I'm not gonna be here. Sorry.
So there's
So
no class.
there's no class next week. I'm not gonna be
Are you
around.
on
I'm sorry.
vacation?
For a day, yes.